Well, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm a crochet pattern designer and you can find most of my work here on Instagram, so please feel free to check it out if you're curious. So in my last video, I showed you guys how to make the calico top, which is a simple crochet shirt top. And today we're going to take a deeper dive into the TSP shirring technique, which was used in that tutorial, and how you can apply it to your own crochet project. Just to note that this technique is 100% crochet. And before we start, please support me by liking, commenting, and subscribing to my channel. And if you ever use this technique in your pattern or content, please make sure to credit me. Now, let's get started. The TSP in TSP shirring stands for the top stitch post, which refers to the placement of the shirring. As many of you know, a crochet stitch has different parts in its anatomy, two of which is the top stitch and the post. The top stitch post is simply the space between these two parts. While it's not a stitch itself, you can access it by going in between the top stitch and the post. This hidden stitch is what makes it perfect for crocheting elastic into because it's so out of sight. By anchoring your elastic in this spot, you get that shirt effect without the elastic being too visible from the front side because it's sandwiched by the top stitch and the post. And if you flip your work to the wrong side, this is what it looks like. Tension control is the most important thing when it comes to the TSP shirring technique. It determines how much your work will shrink. My number one tip on controlling your tension is to not control with the hand that is holding your hook, but to control with the hand that is holding your yarn. Number two is when crocheting normal tension, make sure that your stitch is the same size as your hook. The easiest way that I do this is not to pull the hook away from my work after picking up a new loop, and instead just pull enough to make another slip stitch, keeping my hook as close to the work as possible. To check if your tension is normal is to match the size of the slip stitch to your loop when your work is rested. And my tip number three is when crocheting with tight tension, make sure that your stitch is smaller than your hook. You can also use a 0.5mm smaller hook size to crochet in tight tension and match your top stitch to the smaller hook size. Here I've switched to a 3mm hook instead of the 3.5mm hook that I was using earlier to make my tension tighter. The TSP shirring technique is simply slip stitching into every second TSP of a stitch on multiple consecutive rows or round. To do this, you need to make sure that you have an even number of stitches per rows or round so that the stitch meets and ends correctly. When shirring in a round, you need to start with an even number of stitches. Use the single crochet stack method instead of the chain 2 for the turning change, or don't count the chain 2 as a stitch. Here I have an even number of foundation double crochet in a round. First I'm gonna do the single crochet stack together method as my first stitch. This way you have a top stitch post on the first stitch for you to crochet the elastic in. Then make double crochet until the end of round. Slip stitch into the first stitch to join the round and continue making an even number of rounds. Here I have a round with a diameter of 21 cm. First, you're going to start off with a slip knot and make sure that your slip knot is the same size as your hook. Then remove the slip knot from your hook. Next, depending on your design, you can start any round. I'll be starting on the first round, which is the foundation double crochet round. Insert your hook through the first TSP stitch and reattach your slip knot back onto the hook and pull through. We're gonna take the tail and just pull it out and then chain 1. Next, we're gonna skip the next TSP stitch and slip stitch into the third stitch. And then skip the next stitch and slip stitch into the stitch after that. You're just going to skip and slip stitch into every second TSP stitch until you reach the end of round. Once you've reached the end of round, you should have 1 stitch left. You're going to skip that stitch and slip stitch into the first stitch. Next, you're going to chain 2 and cut your yarn. And to tighten up, you're just going to tighten up this knot by pulling onto the tail. To secure the end some more, we're going to grab these 2 tails that you should have and tie them in a triple knot. You can now cut the tail to about 1 centimeter. Now that you have the first round done, we're going to start with the second round. Starting the second round is exactly the same as starting the first round. And depending on your design, you can work the shirring on any round. I'll be working it in every second round for this example. So starting with the first TSP stitch, you're just going to attach your yarn and chain 1. And then skip the first TSP and then slip stitch into the third TSP. And then skip and then slip stitch. And you're just going to repeat that until the end of round, mirroring the exact same thing you did for the first round. Repeat the shirring round for as many rounds as you need for your work, making sure that it is distributed evenly. After you've completed all your shirring rounds, it should look like this. And if you flip your work to the right side, you shouldn't be able to see any elastic at all. In the case that you are using an elastic that is a contrasting color to your yarn, simply stretch your work like so and any visible elastic will disappear. Now let's measure how much it has shrunk to. And it's about 9 centimeter, so we went from 21 to 9 centimeter, which is about 42% of the 21. Now onto the rows. It is exactly the same as the rounds except you're not slip stitching into the first stitch. Here I have an even number of double crochet rows and we're going to start shirring on the first row, which is the foundation double crochet rows. And to start, we're going to make a slip knot and then take the elastic off your hook. Insert your hook into the first TSP and reattach your elastic back onto the hook and chain 1. Make sure to also pull on the tail. Next, we're going to repeat the exact same thing as we did with the round, so skip the second TSP and slip stitch into the third TSP. And then skip the next stitch and slip stitch into the stitch after that. And you're just going to repeat this until you reach the end of round. Once you've reached the end of round, you should have at least 3 TSP stitch left. We're going to skip the first one and slip stitch into the second last TSP. And then chain 2, and we're going to cut our yarn here. And then to fasten up, we're just going to pull on this knot. Then you can cut the tail to about 1 centimeter. And similarly to the rounds, your work should have shrunk a bit. And you're going to repeat this for as many rows as you need. I'm starting my next row on row 3. And this is what it looks like after 2 rows of shirring. And before I started the shirring, the panel measured out to be 23 centimeters. And this is what your work should be like after a couple rounds of shirring. The tension should be tighter when you pull onto it. And similarly to the rounds, if you see any visible elastic, just simply stretch your work. And now to measure the shrinkage, it is about 11 centimeters, which is about 47% of the 23. Before you continue on to the mask, there are a few questions that you have to address. The first question is, are you working in rows or round? It is important to know that you do require a different kind of mask depending if you're working in rows or round. Next question is, what stitch are you working with? Is it half double crochet or any other stitch? One thing to note about this is that the closer the shirring rounds are to each other, the more tension you will get. Next is, are you adding shirrings on every round, every second round, or anything else? Because once again, the closer the shirrings are to each other, the more tension you have and the less it will stretch. And the next one, how much tension do you want? The tension is of course depends on how you hold your yarn, but also depends on what stitch you use and how close your shirring rounds are to each other. And lastly, do you have other closure method? Is the shirring the only thing keeping your work together, or do you have a zipper closure, a button closure, or any other closure method? Let's take a look at some existing clothes that make use of shirring in different ways. So straight up, number 1 and 2 is very similar to the calico top, which is an all-round shirring. Doing the math for something like this is really easy, as your main concern is that it fit around your body circumference. Number 3 is very similar to number 1 and 2, except that the shirring rows has been distributed very differently. Therefore, the tension is more loose. And number 4 is of course a bit more loose than number 3, as the shirring rounds are more further apart. As for number 5, this is my favorite way of using the shirring technique, and it is just for a panel. For something like this, the shirring should be a bit tighter in tension than working in the round. Now onto the mask. So the mask for this technique is something that you have to play around with, as every design will need a different kind of mask. Depending on where and how much shirring you need, especially if your design involves other stitches, the shrinkage rate will change. I will be using calico as an example and break down how I did the mask for that. So this is the mask that is used for calico. So my bust circumference is the widest part that I need my dress or top to fit, so I use that as a base. Bust circumference times 0.4 is simply 40% of the bust measurement. And then I use that 40% and add it onto my bust measurement, which gives me measurement A, which is how much I need my top to be before it shrinks. Using my own measurement as an example, my bust circumference is 84 cm times 0.4 gives me 33.6. I'm going to add my bust circumference onto that 33.6 is 117.6, and I'm going to round that to the nearest number, which is 118 cm. This means that my first row, which is my foundation double crochet row, will have to reach 118 cm to be able to fit my body when it shrinks. So why 40%? As you know from the swatch earlier, the shrinkage rate is actually about 60%, but if I add 60% from my bust measurement, it will shrink to my bust measurement. What you want isn't for the top to actually sit on your body, but you want it to cinch. So your overall measurement after cinching needs to be smaller than your actual body measurement. And the reason for the 40% is that I want my top to cinch about 20% from my body measurement. So if I add another 40% onto my top, it will give me about 60% shrinkage rate, which is what I got from my swatch. This will ensure that my top will be able to stretch to about 30 to 35%, which is enough to get in and out and give me comfort. The main takeaway from this is to swatch a lot, try different stitches, try different shirring rows, and see how much your work shrinks, and you can go from there. These are some shirring combinations that you can play around with. As you can see, the tension of each of these are very different.
If you enjoyed this tutorial, please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.